the Tronsmart T6 Plus upgraded. Been getting a bunch of requests to review this speaker.
How many?
3 requests to review this speaker, and on paper, really interesting. I was asked, can you compare it against the Motion Plus? Now, might sound strange to you, and maybe people don't realize that the T6 Plus was an on-axis speaker. Left, right woofers, 2 passive radiators, listen on axis. This is a 360-degree speaker. Of course, what they call 360-degree speakers, not truly 360-degree. They're really the ones that fire up, and literally, wherever you are, it sounds the same. Woofers firing to the sides, and passive radiators, dual passive radiators, means it's going to sound different from the front, the back, the sides, but you'll get a better spread, theoretically, than if you had an on-axis speaker, like the Motion Plus, our pound-for-pound world champion. Theory being, that's fine if you're sitting in front of it, but if you're walking around, well, you're going to get a better spread of sound from a 360-degree speaker. I thought it was a bit strange, and then I saw the headlines. It's a 40-watt speaker. We've only got 30 watts from the Motion Plus. We've got 40 watts from the Tronsmart T6. However, when I got the box, and of course I didn't read the specs correctly. On the box it says 40 watts max, and of course when I read the specs now on Amazon, 40 watts peak. That's a world away from RMS. That's a world away from real music power. 40 watts peak doesn't really mean a lot. Instantaneous peak power that it could possibly deliver does not tell you what the speaker delivers. However, I thought on paper, okay, 360 versus on axis may not be that interesting because this seems to be taken on all comers. But 40 watts, it may just make the difference. I should actually point out, of course, the Tronsmart, it was the T6, then it's the Plus, then it's the upgraded. What do they mean by upgraded? Well, not the drivers, everything but the drivers. You probably assume they've upgraded the drivers. They've upgraded everything by looking at the specs other than the drivers. Better build quality, they seem to be saying, and I think they're saying the fact that it fires both sides is upgraded, because it was always cylindrical, and although on axis you could put it on the table like that, it seemed to be designed to be listened to that way round, much like the Sony XB23. It's also interesting because, well, there's a multitude of things going on here. First of all, we have our rotary volume control. You may be thinking, oh great, I've got fine granule control because it's clicky. It's a clicky sound. Fine granule control of your volume. But no, this is independent of your phone. So it'll fire up in about, I don't know, 50% volume or 50% of its power. You'll get the volume you want on your phone, but if you want a bit more volume, you could do it that way around, or you could go to your phone. But when you're a max on your phone, you'll have to come down it. So this is a bit weird on paper, and I'll show you in practice what that actually means. But however, if you want full volume, your 40 watts peak max out of this speaker, you have to dial it all the way up. You know it's dialed all the way up because it will give you a tone. Let me do that now. I'll turn it on. I don't turn it on that way. I've got no idea why I did that. You turn it on from the power button. Wait for it to connect. It's connected, and I've got to do this till I hear the bim, 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 bim. I now know it's at maximum volume. But if you want maximum volume, you've got to do that each and every time. That's your first clue to maybe it's not that practical, but on paper it makes it sound interesting. We've also got 3 EQ modes. We've got a balance mode, a 3D mode. We've got a bass enhanced mode. So, I mean, we've got left and right. So I like when I've got a single. By the way, I'm going to compare it also to the Flare Soundcore Anker, the Anker Soundcore Flare 2, which is also a 360-degree speaker. It's smaller, but it's a £60 speaker, whereas that's like an £80 speaker, £50-ish. I think we'll get a handle on where this sits in terms of value and its sound by comparing with these other 2 speakers. But I like to listen on axis because I want some stereo. What's the point of firing left and right if I'm not going to get stereo? But of course, that means how is it tuned? Is it tuned on axis or is it tuned for 360? Because tuning on axis means you need a sharper high end than you would do normally listening face on, because obviously that's going to roll off when you listen, with it firing to the sides. The highs being very directional. So I'm going to get straight into frequency response and try and go over exactly what is happening in terms of default volume, maximum volume, frequency on axis. So when I say on axis, that's face on, and off axis, side on when you're actually directly in line with one of the speakers, but then the other speaker will be firing completely the other direction away from you. My measurements.
So we've got volume control on the Tronsmart itself. Let's look at the difference between upping the volume or the default volume. Default volume, 60%, 80%, 100%. I need a bit more volume. Now with the volume control turned to maximum on the speaker itself, 20% is the equivalent of about 80% without it on. 40% is almost maximum. 6% is well above maximum at default. So just to make that clearer, 60% on speaker volume control set to maximum, and then device set to 60% is then significantly louder. So basically 100% in default mode is about 50% if you had it set to maximum on the speaker. And as you can see, it doesn't really change the sound at all. Weird things going on at the very high end, but basically the nature of the sound doesn't change. So you can leave it on, leave it off. It's a matter of choice. It just means it will play a lot quieter if that's what you want without it switched to maximum on the speaker itself. If we set it to maximum, let's have a look at what's going on. 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. Well, the good news is it's very linear. I'm getting significant levels of increased bass as I got the volume. 100%, I'm still getting an increase over lower volumes in the bass. There isn't a hard limit or anything near a hard limit. That's good news. Bad news is, wow, it's rolling off from 2 kilohertz. Bear in mind, this is on axis, how I would expect to listen to it. I know it's a 360-degree speaker. We've got left and right woofers. You'd expect to try and get your stereo by on axis. But clearly, it's not tuned on axis. Weirdly, it's tuned off axis. If I measure it side on, 80% side on, 80% front on for stereo. And as you can see at the high end, there is your high end. It's still a bit weird because it still dramatically dip. But then we got this big peak, which we're not going to get front on. So from that, you'd be thinking, oh, maybe it is tuned front on, and then it would be quite smooth. But it isn't. That peak is not helping in any way front on. So weird frequency response. How do you measure something like that? Front on, very upper bass heavy, as you can see. Roll off 2.5 kilohertz. I mean, what do you take as being the peak and the dip? I mean, if I measured from here, you say, oh, bass is going under 50 hertz, fantastic. But of course, that would be plus or minus about 11 decibels, plus or minus 11, which is ridiculous. So that doesn't count. So most of the music you're going to hear is around here, say about there, which means bass is coming down about 70 hertz. Dip is there, and you could say around the 60 hertz. At best, you could say this can do 60 hertz, which isn't bad. It's just a weird frequency response. We do have a bass mode. I turn on bass mode and bang, I haven't got more bass. Found that extraordinary. I retested this. Maybe I got the bass and a 3D mode the wrong way around. It's 100% 3D, 100%. Hardly doing much at all. Just doing weird things again. Give a bit more high end. And then the bass mode, almost identical. On, off. I'm not getting more bass. So I don't know if my Tronsmart T6 is bust or not, but EQ does not help in any way. In fact, I just seem to get less volume with maybe a bit more peak, where I probably don't want it, about, 11 kilohertz again, 12 kilohertz.
So yeah, not looking that great from the frequency response. From my measurements, I don't know if there's anything wrong with my speaker, but changing the EQ modes makes almost no difference, to the point where it's going to get it's already complicated going to be a video. It's going to be overly complicated if I'm going to go into 3D modes and bass modes and all that. I'm sticking with default mode because the other modes don't seem to make much or any difference on my particular speaker. Maybe it's not working on my speaker, but I don't know. First time I've had a Tronsmart. I'm also going to be doing most of my tests on axis because, first of all, if I'm comparing it with an on-axis speaker, it makes most sense. And if I've only got one speaker, surely I want to listen to it on axis, but have a reasonable spread of sound. I will just give you some of the other headline specs. As I said, it's about a £50 speaker, came out January 2020. It's a 7.4 volt, 3,300 milliamp hour battery, but they've gone for a bit of instantaneous power rather than longevity. So in terms of battery life, on my test, with it set to maximum on the manual volume control, 1 hour 42 minutes in total. We don't know what it actually is. I'm guessing maybe it's about a 20 watt speaker if they're claiming 40 watts at max. We got the basic SBC codec. It is Bluetooth 5. You can stereo pair two of them, true wireless stereo pairing. We do have a USB-C connection for the charging. We do have an auxiliary input. You know, a lot of these Chinese speakers do tend to come all singing, all dancing, so we do still get auxiliary inputs with them. You can use it as a power bank. You can use it as a speakerphone. It's 750 grams in weight, which sits somewhere in between the two. The Anker being the Anker Flare 2 being 600 grams, and a kilo for the Soundcore Motion Plus. However, a bit of a shock to me, being the upgraded version, and these Chinese speakers tending to go for headline features over other things you may be interested in, like sound quality, but it's IPX6. You can't drop this in water. You've got a problem if you drop this in a pool. It's actually IPX6, it's splash proof. In terms of frequency response, well, I showed you my testing. Frequency response measurements really need to be done in an anechoic chamber, which costs mega money, and so these speakers, these are an indication of what you would get in the real world. 20 hertz to 16 kilohertz. So they are notifying you that it's not going to go all the way up to 20 kilohertz, but as I didn't say plus or minus 3 decibels, I'm surprised I didn't say 20 kilohertz, and they're saying it's from 20 hertz. From 20 hertz would mean we could use it as a subwoofer, and I'm guessing we can't use it as a subwoofer. We'll have to see where we are. We've got 2 woofers, we've got 2 passive radiators. In terms of latency, my testing wasn't very good. 180 milliseconds is a very noticeable lag. That's not great. 66% volume. I can play this for 4 hours and 28 minutes. Let's get straight into on axis, all 3 speakers. I'm at 49% on the T6. I'm also at 49% on the Flare 2, but the Motion Plus, I'm at 36%.
The labyrinth will guide you far away to the place where senses will decay. Your ghost and mind will shadow play. I got you out upside down.
So the Tronsmart T6 Plus upgraded when you listen on Axis. Very, very veiled. Simply hasn't been tuned to be listened to on Axis, where you'd get your stereo. The Flare 2, the Motion Plus. Motion Plus, in terms of the bass, which if you're buying the Tronsmart is what I guess you're looking for. All speakers about the same in the bass peak, 93 hertz. Surprisingly, at low volumes where it doesn't really excel the Soundcore Motion Plus. A little bit behind in the deeper bass, minus 24, minus 39, minus 20, minus 32, minus 20, minus 30. Actually, the Flare 2 at these volumes normalized, and that means the same volume as the Tronsmart T6. She has a little bit more lower bass while also having a little bit more high end.
Wow. So on Axis, I mean, if you was to take the Flare 2 and put a towel over it, you'd have some idea what the Tronsmart... I don't know. Maybe mine is bust or something. But these are the measurements on my Tronsmart T6. Massively rolled off the high mids and high end to the point. It's very, very veiled. Maybe surprised that at these normalized volumes, the low end on the Motion Plus is a little bit behind the Flare 2. Well, the Flare 2, you know, it's not even as big as the T6. It does play well. I do like this speaker. I'm not saying it's a fantastic value for money or anything like that, but I find it a very pleasant speaker to listen to. And I do like the way the lights come on, which I'll show you. Yeah, top and bottom. You leave that on a shelf or something, it's quite a pleasant listen. So holds up at low end, at the lower volumes, very veiled on the T6. Let's try 70% on the T6, which means Now we're at 63% on the Flare 2. We're at 46% on the Motion Plus.
As we hit 70% for the T6, it's as veiled as ever, but at least its bass is a bit more prominent compared to the Flare 2, the Motion Plus. The Motion Plus still more geared toward a sparkly high end in terms of the deeper bass, 50 Hz, minus 39, minus 36 for the Flare 2. Normalized volumes a bit more for Flare 2, a tad more for the T6.
The T6 does improve a little bit as you push it, and the Flare 2, it hardens up. It becomes more compressed sounding in its nature as you push it. It's a pleasant speaker, but as you push it, it's not holding up so much. And obviously, anyone who did ask me, can you do the Tronsmart 6 Plus upgraded versus the Motion Plus, is thinking, well, I'm pretty happy I didn't spend the 50 quid on the Tronsmart. At the moment, listening to the two, this is open and sparkly with decent bass weight, although depending on the volumes, it doesn't quite have the deep bass extension. But the Tronsmart, well, it has a bass extension. I can't knock it. It's what you would call unbalanced in its nature. So you're probably thinking, come on, mate, these are 360-degree speakers. That's an on-axis speaker. Well, even though I'm comparing it to another 360-degree speaker, clearly this is more tuned to, for some reason. I don't know. Maybe they just forgot to retune it from the T6 Plus. But it's going to sound better side on, surely. So you might be thinking, well, these aren't fair tests then, are they? So I'll do this side on. I'm going to do 80% on the T6, which means, you know, to your ears, it's going to be the same volume as 73% on the Flare 2 and 69% on the Motion Plus.
Because of you, I'm whole again. Sometimes you just gotta turn the light on. Now I found
Side on, T6 clearly sounds better, but still not quite right. Still has a big roll off and still has a big dip at 7,000 hertz. So weird things going on at its high end. But it does sound a little bit better, bit more balanced now, side on, and normalized, having the deepest extension -35, 3 dB up on the Flare 2, 1 dB up on the Motion Plus. Flare 2 strongest all the way to the end, making it sound slightly thinner though. Obviously tuned for listening on axis. T6 weirdly seems tuned for listening side on. And the Motion Plus, obviously an on-axis speaker, but does have a decent spread of sound and holds its own even side on against the 360-degree speakers.
Well, it does change things and it does improve things for the T6. One thing it doesn't do is change it in terms of the advantage for the Motion Plus. Now, you may or may not be aware that one test of a decent speaker would be it's how even the spread of its sound is. So even though it's an on-axis speaker, you'd expect a decent spread off angle. And actually, listening from side on, it still has a decent spread to its sound. You know you've got a decent speaker when it's doing that, and it's not a very narrow listening angle. So even then, side on and side on, I'm still preferring the Motion Plus. I don't know about you. The Flare 2 clearly tuned on axis, so it doesn't fare so well. So it evens things up between the T6 and the Flare 2. And if you want bass, you're going to go for the T6. But if you want a clearer sound, albeit thinner sound, you'll go for the Flare 2. But the Motion Plus, to me, still sounds the best of the bunch, even side on, even with the speak, all drivers firing away from you. So now I'm going to go back to on axis, which to me is the fairest test, no matter what you may be thinking. I'm going to push that T6. Let's see what it can do when it's really pushed. You know, another side of a good speaker is it's not going to completely lose its way as you push it to those maximum volumes. So 90% on the T6 means 80% on the Flare 2, 60%, just 60%. That's how much more headroom, although even on paper we knew that, 30 watts, 20 watts, and I'm guessing 20 watts. 90% now on the T6.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't a project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. When I was just a little young and my mom thought I was bugging, cause I played with the wrong toys. No Barbie dolls, just sports balls. You could call me a tomboy. No dance classes, just hockey practice. Was born to win. My hair was a mess, I would never wear a dress, but I didn't really give a shit. I would go to class, passing notes. No flirting though, just cracking jokes. Smoking dope, but I kept my promise. Straight A's and I went to college. Bachelor's and a master's. Strong, independent, and I'm educated. Priorities backwards. Money that I'm in, goddamn, I made it. I can say who I wanna date. Don't mistake for monogamy. No third base, let's go all the way. Drinking rosé like a holiday. No need to own cause I pay rent. You need me, I'm going on vacation. I party with no obligation. I'm single and I feel amazing. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life. You may say I ain't doing it right. You can do what you like, but I'm choosing my life, okay? And I refuse your advice. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I'm so free. Life is good. Baby, see. Yeah. How we out, baby?
Around 90% volume for the T6. Flare 2, 80%. Motion Plus still just 60%. In terms of the 120 Hz mark, 70 Hz mark, Motion Plus has the bigger mid bass to upper bass, but in terms of the deep bass, still slightly behind. The 50 Hz -48, -42.5 for the Flare 2, which is well ahead of the T6.
So bear in mind, I have got it all the way to maximum of the dial. You may be thinking, what if that's volume is at the preamp stage? What if it's just a cleaner sound? Well, it may just be a cleaner sound if you leave it at default, but it's also very quiet. I couldn't use it without turning this right up. It does sound, you do hear, and it's not a very clean sound compared say to the Motion Plus at those volumes, you can hear a hint of distortion. You can also hear the very woolly nature of the bass. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I like this, and a lot of people say, well, you like it, it must be great. But no, mate, I'm just giving you my opinion, and my tastes make very, very, very much. So I try and give you the technical nature, and I just tell you, me personally, what I like. I like this, but it is a very woolly bass, and if you go into the EQ, that's why I didn't push the EQ in the absolute lowest bass. I think it's 80 hertz. Because it becomes even more woolly. So it has bass extension, but it sounds very woolly. Not totally out of control, and it even does it at lower volumes. But it has a pleasant nature to its sound that I quite like. So the T6 does hold up, if you forgive it a little bit. You know, it's not the cleanest sounding. There is obvious distortion, but it's not so heavy that it's going to completely ruin the listening experience, which just leaves what is the headroom on all these speakers? Maximum volume.
Been a while, but I'm coming out of my shell, and I never thought I would fall in love with someone just like you. Ain't nobody here now. I hear you calling out. I hear you calling out for love. Ain't nobody here now, but I hear you calling out. I hear you calling out for love, and I hear you calling.
As we head to maximum volume, it's now no surprise the Motion Plus has the most headroom. It's way louder than the Flare 2, by about 7 decibels, and the T6 by about 8 decibels. I mean, it's night and day difference in terms of what's happening in the bass. The T6 now well ahead of the Flare 2 when they are both really pushed, even though overall it's not as loud because of that high-end drop-off when on axis. In terms of deep bass, Motion Plus minus 39 at 50 hertz, 6 dB up on the Flare 2, T6 3 decibels off. The bass is still there on the T6, more so than the Flare 2, but the sheer headroom on the Motion Plus means ultimately you're going to get way more bass out of it when you push it, if you're playing at loud volumes.
So if the question is against the Motion Plus because you're just seeing 40 watt headlines, it's not a 40 watt speaker, and it can't really hold a candle, certainly when you're pushing maximum volumes to the Motion Plus. Motion Plus, head and shoulders louder, so you have more room for that bass extension. The bass does hold up, even though you push it to 100%, more so than the Flare 2. So at these volumes, when they're pushed totally, the Flare 2 does kind of fall apart. You do lose that bass extension. It's still there on the T6, but it's not the cleanest of sounding, and there's no balance to the sound. It's all high. So if you just want the beat, if you just want a bit of bass extension, sure, it's going to do that. But the question is, 50 quid, does that make it a bargain at 50 quid? 80 quid for the W King D8. If you really want a heavy bass sound, a boombox on the budget, I'm not sure under what circumstances that would make a lot of sense. So I hope I covered everything. You may want to know between on the T-Smart. I probably should have got the Plus. I was humming and hawing, but people do seem to want the upgraded version, simply because it seems to be in the headlines upgraded, so it must be better. But the drivers are the same. They say themselves, if you read the on their website, they haven't changed the drivers, just repositioned them. So yeah, pretty underwhelmed by the T6, because even at 20 watts against 20 watts, okay, yeah, the bass holds up, but there isn't the bass extension. There isn't, but there isn't the mids and the highs. There is just no balance. It is just bass. And I'm not quite sure under what circumstances that would make it a great buy for you. But I hope I gave you information to make your decision on whatever parameters you're making your decision on. I thank you for watching.